But look him in the eye and say, neighbor, I've had enough. You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. Sisters and brothers, this past Monday evening, sitting and turned on television and found that they were getting ready to announce the grand jury verdict in the case of the killing of Michael Brown by Ferguson, Missouri Police Officer Darren Wilson during an altercation as Brown walked down the street with a friend on August 9th this past summer. After 3 months of protest and speculation, interviews, commentaries, and legal drama, Monday night the verdict came that Officer Wilson would not face any charges, leaving many concerned observers stunned and a country once again divided. Now, let me say from the outset of this message that my intent this morning is not to re-argue the facts of the case or call into question the verdict that was rendered, nor is my intent to convince you of the guilt or innocence of any particular person. Rather, my intention this morning as a herald of the good news of God is to speak to our collective pain and offer a word about how we might find a way to move into a brighter day. No one person in this place this morning knows exactly what happened on that afternoon in August. No one here really knows why young Michael Brown lost his life on that day. But what we do know is today there are those whose hearts are broken and others who are just plain mad as hell that no one will be criminally held accountable for the shooting of yet another young black male. To be sure, there are those who say race had nothing to do with the incident. And some of these folk wonder why many black Americans are dismayed, disappointed, and distraught at Monday's verdict. Well, the reality is, whether you believe Darren Wilson was innocent or guilty, you have to admit that the pain of black Americans is not only understandable, but is also altogether justified. Especially when you consider the shameful legacy and history of blacks in this country. It should be apparent to everyone where the source of our pain proceeds. I really don't need to go through a list of all of the legal ramblings across the chasm of history that sought to disenfranchise our people and set them aside as second-class citizens. But from 1619 to 2014, there have been efforts to ensure that we understood that we were not on equal footing as everyone else in the nation that we helped to build. So if you're wondering why some feel the way they do this morning, it's because Lady Justice has not always been blind and the system has not always been fair. In fact, the reality is, for the better part of our nation's history, white Americans could be morally wrong, but legally not guilty. And this sad but true fact has led to the plight of being black in America as one of being unsafe, unprotected, and subject to random violence at any time. And this sad but true fact leads to many black parents and young people to wonder if there's any truly safe place in these yet to be united states of America. And this sad but true fact causes many to wonder if we will ever live in a nation that is as good as its promise. Back in 1963, on August 28th, Dr. King stood before hundreds of thousands in his famous I Have a Dream speech and said that America has defaulted on the check that it wrote to us. And today I here to tell you that that check is yet coming back stamped insufficient funds. So today, as we gather in this hallowed sanctuary, as a family in Ferguson is in pain over the tragic loss of their beloved Michael Brown, today a man has to figure out how he's going to move forward with his life after taking the life of another person. Today, our country is torn yet again over what W.E.B. Du Bois called the intractable issue of the color line. Today our community is in pain over the unatoned loss of another precious black life taken because of senseless violence. And indeed today the collective pain and division in the nation is evident. And this really should lead us as followers of Christ to ask the question, what does our faith say to those that are hurting? It should lead us to ask the question, is there truly any balm in America for our weary souls? Well, some of you who are old enough to remember, Sister Davis and Brother Smith, and some of you that are old enough to remember, amen, you remember back in the disco music time, there was this song that Donna Summer sang called Enough Is Enough. In other words, she was saying, I can't go no more. She had been in a relationship that she finally saw was going nowhere. She saw that it was time for her to move on and do better. She saw that it was time to stop putting up with all of the heartache and pain, all the sorrow and wrongdoing, all the misdirection and misfortune. It was time for her to say, I've had enough. One of the most, those of you who remember the movie What's Love Got to Do with It? Anybody remember that movie? Eat the Cake anime. One of the most poignant scenes in the movie What's Love Got to Do With It is when Tina Turner runs into a motel after an out-and-out brawl with Ike. Her lips are swollen and bleeding. Her hair is disheveled and she's semi-barefoot. She runs across the parking lot to a motel and says to the desk clerk, I've got 36 cents and a mobile car. But if you give me a room for the night, as soon as I'm able, I'll repay you. That night, according to the movie, was a defining moment in Tina's life. She walked away from a life of physical, emotional, and mental abuse. That night, she walked away from an emotional and psychological prison when she decided she had enough and decided to say no to an unproductive, unhealthy relationship. She opened the door to a new and exciting chapter in her life. And those of y'all that are familiar with her career know that from that night forward, the rest is music history. And when I think about Tina's story, when I think about the family of Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin and of Eric Garner and of little Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old boy who was playing with a toy gun in the park and was shot by police 2 seconds after they arrived on the scene, I'm reminded of the character of this particular text that is before you this morning, a woman by the name of Leah. Now, saints of God, Leah's name means wearied or afflicted one.